Daniel, it's time to panic a little bit because the collapse might be here finally.
Yeah, so we have been talking on the show for a year about the coming recession. I feel like we've talked about enough that we should get a GIF on this at some point with just like everyone freaking out. But don't freak out, obviously.
Don't panic.
So we've talked about how this part of the economy is starting to sputter and this part's starting to sputter, and we've talked about like the dozen or so bubbles that are ready to burst, whether it be real estate again, or used cars, or student loans, or passive income in the stock market, or the stock market itself, or all these other things. This is one angle that is developing a little more. So, on September was an absolute disaster for new car sales. More bad news may lay ahead for the car industry as a whole. They have seen a general flattening or outright decline in new car sales after nearly a decade of unfettered growth. So that means that for the last decade, since '08, basically, every quarter, 3% more car sales than the month before. 3% or 3%. So we're at a spot where it's plateaued. And you know what happens? You run a roller coaster. You know what happens when you go up and then you plateau. You know exactly what's happening next. And we see this is just another story of another plateau happening. So the results were disastrous for leading Asian automakers, Toyota Motors and Honda Motors, which, we can also factor in the Trump tariffs, which are, of course, making it much worse for Asian automakers. But that's just China. Not all of these are Chinese companies, so let's also keep that in mind, which both suffered double-digit declines that were worse than analysts anticipated. And the only thing that's worse in the stock market than losing money is losing more money than people expected you to lose, or I suppose making less money than people expected you to make, but that's a separate story. Overall, deliveries of cars and light trucks could come in worse than the 12% drop anticipated by analysts based on 6 estimates. So again, the worst thing you could do in an open market is lose more money than people expect, because then they start to freak out. The severity of the slide stokes fears that the long-anticipated car sales collapse may be arriving. They go on in the article how dealerships, which are already dealing with very low margins, they have too many new cars. As they put it, they're clogged with new cars that no one is buying. And they're still making cars because of demand that they expected that is dropping. So we're looking at right now just 10% of the sales just wiped away, 10% with these companies. We have a few companies that are doing kind of okay, like BMW is getting like 3%, but that's not an everyday person's car. That's a more luxury style car. So we're dealing with this, and of course, auto sales represents an enormous amount of money and jobs and economies around the world. They even go further in the article with the strike that's happening with GM. GM is losing $25 million a day due to the strike. But what the strikers are asking has a lot to do with long-term longevity and wages for workers. You have legacy workers that are making twice as much as new workers are. And GM is basically holding fast and saying long-term, we don't want to deal with pensions. We don't want to deal with long-term expensive benefits because we're retooling everything to go electric and autonomous, which of course was pushed through by the spearhead of Tesla, who've got them to get them rolling on that. But it's very clear that this market is beginning to sputter and collapse, and the industry knows that this trend is happening. So they don't want to start paying people out a lot of money, giving them long-term benefits and long-term guarantees when they know there's about to be this collapse.
Okay, so Daniel, I just had an immediate flashback to when we were on the radio, when it was you, me, Lainey, and Paul, way back when we first started Hard Lens Media. And I remember it was either you or Lainey, I forget which you guys had the 2 articles, but both articles were basically saying how millennials are killing the car industry and Applebee's or something like that. And the thing is like, okay, I understand that the car, this is a sign. This is one of the canaries in the coal mine. It's basically saying there is a financial collapse on its way. And look, for the record, we don't want this thing to happen, but it's going to happen. The can has been kicked down the road so many times now that it's reaching its end. And look, there's the crisis of student debt. There's the crisis of medical debt. There's numerous other issues, such as people recovering from areas that have been impacted by climate change. And this is just a perfect storm that's just brewing. And when this economy does fall apart, it's not going to be like the 2008 recession. It can be a depression. Let's call it for what it is. There's recession this, recession that. That's just a polite word to cover the real fact that there is a depression on its way, and we're due for one.
Yeah.
And, you know, the whole economy has changed drastically. So this is something that we should definitely be aware of. And let's hope that this current government right now, and granted, this is Trump and his administration that we're talking about, somewhat can be aware or at least have something prepared in advance to deal with this. But the answer is they're not, unfortunately, and everyone's going to be impacted by this. Paul.
No,
So I just want to say quickly on this
Yeah.
as well that this is exactly that case. This is, well, what happens when you starve a number of generations of people money and they stop buying things in an economy whose lifeblood, as 1%ed the money gets, it needs people to buy things to survive. And what happens when people don't buy things?
Right.
You get a collapse because in 08, people still had money. People were still credit. It was just a lot of credit based and still is credit based, but the market throws up, so people had to stop. But it's this is going to be bad.
Right. There's something I want to mention in the live stream chat. Tony watches closely. He says this: car companies sell the cars to the finance company, and the actual person paying for the vehicle won't own it until the finance company is done screwing
Even
them.
that, they're not going to have enough people buying new cars because it's still like a $300 or $400 a month purchase.
Yeah, and even from the beginning, like the whole leasing system is biased and sort of has a financial system behind it. It's all ridiculous in my opinion, but all of this I think dovetails on a few kind of key and interesting things. Like think about how this is something that I always scratch my head about. How many car advertisements do you see on television?
Too many.
It's about 40%.
It's like constant. It's like all the time, and it's like who has all of this money to buy all of these cars?
And I got to interrupt you because we got a super chat. Thank you for the super chat. Nathan Jackson, the economy is okay. The reason people aren't buying new cars is the price of new cars compared to the benefit isn't worth the money they want for them. Used cars, better deal. Manufacturers pricing themselves out of business. All
Yeah.
right.
I think there's two aspects to it. I don't agree with the economy being okay, but I think that technically what he's saying that the reason new cars are it's the benefit, that's true, but I think the reason that benefit happens is people don't have the money for new cars because people will always buy new cars when the option is available if they have the money, because then that's a hierarchy of needs thing. Even used
that's my
cars have
point,
their
though, is that-
entire own
Yeah.
issue.
I think that's been going on for decades. That's not new, right? Who's out there buying new cars? Anyone who's smart enough to go, do I buy something that's a used car that's 3-4 years old that's going to last me a good long time, that is worth way less than buying a brand new car? The only people buying new cars in large quantity are Hertz, Rent-A-Car, and Avis, and Budget or whatever, Alamo.
Or some rich person.
Right.
Well, rich is now a quantitative thing, but I mean,
Yeah.
like someone that has a job that makes $60,000 or $70,000 buys a new car.
no, they don't. They don't.
People have seen it.
It does happen.
I'm not-
People
yeah, yeah.
occasionally lease a new
Yeah.
car and then give it up, so it's kind of like renting a new car long term. But people generally don't buy new cars. Even people who
far
have
less than before. Yeah.
but even so, I know of some folks that have good amounts of wealth that they could buy new cars if they wanted, but even they go the tack of saying, why do that when I can buy a 3-year-old car that I'm going to use for just because you're wealthy doesn't mean you're not frugal,
Yeah.
right? And all I think of is who's buying new cars? Why are they spending so much money on advertising? Why are they constantly doing this? It's only companies. It's companies by and large that are buying the new cars. Companies that are leasing the cars to other people. Companies that are renting them, like the Avis or Hertz or whatever. It's not the regular everyday person, and it doesn't justify. It's one of those things like when you see a transnational oil company advertising on MSNBC. No one who's watching MSNBC for news in their living room at home, no average person needs to know or cares about that. Yeah. The other angle that you brought up kind of tangentially that's important, that's been going on for decades and decades, is just straight the automation part of it. Mm-hmm. So I have that one. Look, automation.
how it
Well,
works.
mind you,
101.
let's be very clear about this automation. This is showing the advancement of AI, and if we don't have some regulations on artificial intelligence, it could get out of hand real
Boston
quick.
Dynamics 1, Boston Dynamics 2, Hollywood.
Right.
Yes.
If we teach, okay, if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a day. Or if you feed a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. If you build a robot that fishes infinitely, does everyone feast or does everyone starve?
Yeah.
That is the question we have to grapple with, right? There's this, I was thinking about this earlier today, actually. There's this odd sort of knee-jerk response to like how we value work and the idea of the economy, whereas like we're constantly as humans trying to make things more efficient and have more output and spend less time working on things, but there's also this sort of cult of work, some people refer to it as,
Yeah.
and this sort of idea of like, well, if people didn't have work and didn't have things to do, everything would be awful and everyone would be bored and everything would be lazy. And it's like,
No.
no, if we didn't have work to do, we would pursue endeavors. We
Okay.
would be creative.
Hold
Like,
on.
we don't have to fill our lives with subservience to another organization to have meaning in our lives.
Okay, so
if
first
there
of
is such a thing as meaning in lives.
So first, I just want to make something very clear. You have Americans out there working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. I can guarantee you this: a lot of people don't like working at some of these jobs, but unfortunately, it's a means to an end. Look, I wake up at 3:30 in the morning to go to my job, and it kills me. It kills me. I want to do this thing full time because I love doing this. Can you imagine if we didn't have that weird system that we're living in right now, in which people can actually be free to do what they want to do and actually contribute and create some more innovation into the society that desperately needs it? Look, Daniel, you were talking about this story right now, and that's the canary in the coal mine. That is a sign that's showing that there is something going to happen. And look,
I would even clarify that it's not even a canary in a coal mine. It is now several canaries in different coal mines that have connected tunnel systems.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, recession's coming.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's
Well,
foregone
let's stop
conclusion.
even calling it a recession. I don't even like that word. It's a depression that's coming. I mean, you got student debt. You have medical debt that's happening. You have the very fact that we never really solved the problems in the 2008 recession, okay? It is going to collapse. Let's stop calling it a recession. It's a polite word. It's a polite word to cover up a real dangerous gaping wound in our society.
But Kit, don't you think there'll be an economic downturn?
Yeah, that's another polite word. Call it a depression. And I just want to mention something from one of our live stream chatters too. Jilly Love 101. This economy is based on greed and cannot exist without slavery, exploitation, and destruction. I couldn't agree more.
This is another thing of the fall of the empire, that America has everything it needs to do everything hypothetically the cheapest way possible because we take from all these other countries. And even that, people have gotten so greedy that they've centralized the wealth and you've lowered liquidity and all these other things. And like I said, like hypothetically, if we got to a point like just tomorrow and people were making a lot of money, yeah, I'm sure people wouldn't buy a lot of new cars right away, but their kids would, because people forget what it's like to be in this situation. That's what we went through from World War II to today with the boomers. Not all boomers, obviously, but we're in a spot where it's about to get very bad, and
Yeah.
it's not that dissimilar from previous times in history.